So Putin wins because of our timidity. Simply doing more to prevent the invasion from succeeding is not escalating on our part. It's just self-defense. And the legitimate economic needs Ukraine has to get those agricultural products out are important for the rest of the world as well. So I think NATO could do more, and I attribute our failing there to the United States, because I think really in many respects the administration is deterred by Putin's threats. Well, I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine has reminded people that there are threats in the world, and has reminded them that the rules-based international order, so-called, that many diplomats, especially in Europe, like to talk about, doesn't really exist. The rule that exists is if you have an adequate deterrent, aggressors will not take advantage of you. And that was certainly what motivated NATO's formation 70 years ago, and I think it's motivated a real rebirth of the alliance here in the past couple of months.
There are some big decisions, increasing the size of the Rapid Reaction Force from 40,000 to 300,000 military personnel. The US itself sending more troops, more ships, more planes into the region. What do you make of Joe Biden's role in this?
Well, I think these are significant decisions, and I think they're the right thing to do. I think, if anything, probably more could have been done, but this is a good start. The real question now is, once we move away from the level of speeches by political leaders to seeing what countries actually do to make concrete these pledges that they've made, that's what will tell us whether this has been a success or not. And it has been, unfortunately, the case for a long time that leaders talk about what they're going to do on defense, but you don't see it backed up by the nitty-gritty of higher budget numbers, real increases in military capability, and the like. If we see a follow-through here on this from this summit, then I think that will be the proof that people have woken up again, that the world is a threatening place.
Yeah, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said NATO members need to step up to the plate in terms of what they're spending. There's a bit of a row about defence spending in the UK, but it's still one of the biggest spending NATO members. But what you're saying is that you think that there are other NATO members who frankly need to put more money and more military hardware into this.
Well, look at Spain itself, which is hosting this the summit in Madrid, which, contrary to the pledge made at Cardiff in Wales in 2014 for each NATO member to target at least 2% of their GDP for defense expenditures, Spain is actually just under 1%, so about half of the target. Germany, of course, is the big question mark, although Chancellor Scholz did commit 100 million euros to procurement. He still has not explained how Germany, over a sustained period, is going to reach the 2% target. They're at about 1.2% now. And these numbers are real. Some of the additions to the Rapid Reaction Force you mentioned, that cost real money every year. If they're really ready to react rapidly, they need equipment, they need training, and a whole host of other things. And that has to be sustained year after year. Otherwise, it's not going to be ready when we need it. So, again, this is we're going to look for performance here. I don't fault anybody's rhetoric at this point. It's great. And now let's see what they actually do.
Yeah, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said that Ukraine can count on NATO for as long as it takes. But there is a bit of concern, isn't there? And it's certainly been articulated by the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson about war fatigue, about whether some countries will find that their voters are getting tired of the amount of not just military hardware, but the cost as well of maintaining this stance against Russia.
Well, I think the Prime Minister is right, although honestly, the cost has not been very great so far. And in the United States, we've had this argument about ending endless wars, which is what Biden did by withdrawing from Afghanistan, although I think it was a big mistake. But in the ending endless wars category, we'd been in Afghanistan, as had the UK and much of NATO, for 20 years. Here we're talking 4 months of war in Ukraine, which is hardly an endless war. So if the West succumbs to fatigue here, that would be a very bad sign that to Russia that aggression can pay off, maybe at a high cost to the Russians, but I don't think their value on human life is the same as ours. And to others, like China in particular, who see the West is unwilling to do more over a period of 4 or 6 months. What does that tell them about our willingness to come to the defense of Taiwan or others along the long periphery of China in the Indo-Pacific?
And do you think it's going to be difficult for President Biden, having, as you rightly pointed out, talked about ending these endless wars? Of course, the deployments and the response in Ukraine is so far fairly brief in relative terms. But everyone is very concerned that this war could continue for quite some time. Do you think he's got sufficient support across the political divide in the United States?
I do. Look, there are strains of isolationism both in the Republican and the Democratic parties coming at that from very different perspectives, but they still remain, certainly on the Republican side, a very distinct minority. And look, this is a test of leadership. If political leaders can't explain to their populations that aggression on the continent of Europe threatens the peace and security and economic well-being of all of us, then they're guilty of political malpractice, or if they're too lazy to do it, that tells you something else. There's no doubt there are politicians, I think more in places like France and Germany than elsewhere, who would like to turn the page on this already. I think that's a big mistake. I think it's the countries of Eastern Europe in particular that are looking at the threat of Russia right across the border in many cases that need to step up and help the leadership that the UK has provided in this and the US, and tell their friends elsewhere in Europe, we said we were going to be in this together, and that means you.
It's a huge change, isn't it, from the days when Donald Trump was president and he talked about NATO being obsolete, and President Macron indeed talked about it being brain dead.
Right. Well, one of the things I feared if Trump had been reelected was that he would follow through on statements he made going back to 2018 and the summit in Brussels that he would have the U.S. withdraw from NATO. I would have been very worried about that, and I think it would have given Putin a huge opportunity against a much weakened alliance to be even more aggressive than he has in Ukraine today.
And what about the response from Russia? Is there a concern that Russia will see these moves as provocative and will feel the need to respond in some way?
No, I think even in Moscow, they understand NATO has never taken an aggressive action. NATO has always been a defensive alliance, and we've proven that. The trouble is, if you're inside NATO, as Finland and Sweden determined after 7 decades of neutrality, you really are safe from Russian aggression. The Russians or the Soviets before them have never crossed the NATO border. It's the countries that are outside of NATO, former parts of the Soviet Union and others, that are now at risk. And it's really incumbent on us to make sure we have thought all that through. I think what's going to happen in Ukraine at some point, and I worry about this, is Putin will say that he has achieved his objectives, whatever they turn out to be, and he'll find a way to say it with a straight face, but he'll try and bring the fighting to a halt unilaterally. And if we accede to that, whatever his ceasefire line is, that will be the new border of Russia. And right now, if he were to stop even today, that would be bad for Ukraine, and I think bad for the rest of us, because the Russians would have roughly doubled or more the territory of Ukraine that they held before the invasion.
Yeah, I mean, how concerned are you that Russia even though their progress has not been as fast as I think the Kremlin had originally hoped, has taken a significant chunk of Ukraine's territory, has in the last week or so taken the city of Severodonetsk, and does still seem to be slowly gaining ground across the east of the country.
Yeah, I think there's too euphoric a mood in some places about how this war is going. There's no doubt the Russian military, certainly in the early days and even now, is not performing optimally from their point of view. They lost huge casualties, enormous amounts of equipment. But if they don't value those in their cost-benefit analysis the way we do, they're acceptable cost to them. And just to remind everybody, this war is being fought in Ukraine. It's not being fought on Russian territory. It's grinding Ukraine into the dust, and the Russians are still advancing. So I think that is the mark of a winning war from their point of view. And regardless of how we view the cost, if they view them as acceptable, they have not learned any lesson about refraining from aggression in the future, which is very troubling.
Just finally, what about the blockade of grain and other supplies from Ukraine's southern ports, which is having a significant effect on supplies to many different countries? Do you think that NATO or the US and other allies could or should do more to try to break that blockade?
I do think we should do more. As I have thought, and as others have said as well, we should have established a no-fly zone in Ukraine, at least over the western part of it, much earlier. People are afraid of escalation. It's certainly a legitimate concern. But if Putin can stop our escalation, we failed to deter him when he invaded on February the 24th, but yet now he's deterring our taking steps that could mitigate the brutality of this conflict or its effects, and yet we're not willing to do it. So Putin wins because of our timidity. Simply doing more to prevent the invasion from succeeding is not escalating on our part. It's just self-defense. And the legitimate economic needs Ukraine has to get those agricultural products out are important for the rest of the world as well. So I think NATO could do more, and I attribute our failing there to the United States, because I think really in many respects the administration is deterred by Putin's threats.